there's a primal pull to the great outdoors, a universal desire to escape the noise of the city, to trade concrete for canvas, and to reconnect with something wild and essential. Camping. It's a promise of freedom, of adventure, of quiet nights under a blanket of stars. It's where we go to feel alive, to test our limits, and to create memories that last a lifetime. But the wilderness is impartial. It doesn't care about our plans, our hopes, or our experience. The very isolation we seek can become a trap. The silence can swallow our cries for help. And sometimes, the most beautiful landscapes become the backdrop for the most horrifying final moments. These are the stories of campers who went into the wild seeking peace, but found an end they could never have imagined. These are the most horrifying camping deaths ever recorded. Case 1. The Mount Ord double homicide Memorial Day weekend. For millions of Americans, it's the unofficial start of summer, a time for barbecues, parades, and the first camping trip of the season. In 2025, for two middle school-aged friends from Arizona, identified in early reports only as Pandora and Evan, it was a chance for a grand adventure. They were good kids, friends who shared a love for the outdoors. They had convinced their parents to let them have a classic American teen experience. A night of camping on their own, under the stars, on the rugged slopes of Mount Ord in the Tonto National Forest. They chose their spot carefully. Not in a crowded, noisy campground, but a more secluded site, accessible by car, yet offering the peace and privacy they craved. On the afternoon of May 25th, they drove up the winding mountain roads, found the perfect clearing with a view, and set up their small tent. They unpacked their gear, laid out their sleeping bags, and prepared for a night of campfire stories and gazing at the cosmos, feeling the thrill of independence. They were miles from home, but in their element. They were exactly where they wanted to be. They had no idea that they were not alone. In the same remote area, another camper had set up his own site, 31-year-old Thomas Brown. His reasons for being there were far, far darker. The night of May 25th passed. The sun rose on the 26th. A beautiful morning in the Arizona wilderness. But back home, a knot of anxiety was tightening in the chests of Pandora's and Evan's parents. The teens were supposed to check in. Calls went to voicemail. Texts went unanswered. By late afternoon, the anxiety had turned to dread. They were officially overdue. A call was made to the Gila County Sheriff's Office. Deputies were dispatched to Mount Ord to conduct a welfare check on the overdue campers. What they found was a scene of unimaginable horror. The small tent, once a symbol of adventure, was now a tomb. Inside and around it, the deputies discovered the bodies of Pandora and Evan. The initial joy of finding the campsite had instantly evaporated, replaced by the grim reality of a double homicide. Both teenagers had been shot at extremely close range. The evidence was brutal and unmistakable. Bullet casings littered the ground, and the tent fabric itself was punctured by the attack. Their sleeping bags, meant for warmth and comfort, were soaked in blood. Their adventure had ended in the most violent way possible, their lives extinguished by an act of senseless, random brutality. The investigation immediately launched into a frantic search for a killer. Who would do this? And why? The teens were just kids. They had no known enemies. The motive seemed non-existent. Investigators scoured the area, interviewing the few other campers who had been scattered across the mountain that weekend. The name Thomas Brown surfaced. And as detectives dug deeper, the pieces began to fall into place. DNA evidence found in the victim's SUV was a match. Gloves, stained with the victim's blood, were linked to him. Witnesses confirmed seeing him in the immediate vicinity of the teen's campsite around the time of the murders. In October 2025, Thomas Brown was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The case sent a shockwave through the community and the nation. It was the ultimate camper's nightmare realized. Law and Crime described it as the senseless murder of 2 teenagers on a camping trip, apparently targeted by a stranger in the woods. Investigators could only call it a random act of extreme violence. For Pandora and Evan, their dream of a night of freedom in the wild had placed them in the path of a predator, turning their perfect campsite into a place of slaughter. Case 2. The off-grid starvation camp. In our modern chaotic world, the fantasy of escape is a powerful one. The dream of leaving it all behind, the politics, the noise, the society we no longer trust, and living a simpler, purer life in nature is a seductive call. For 42-year-old Rebecca Vance of Colorado, this was not just a fantasy, it was an obsession. Consumed by a fear of societal collapse and what she called the end of the world, she found her truth not in the world around her, but in the echo chamber of online survivalist videos. She believed that the only way to save her family was to take them completely off the grid. Her family consisted of her loyal sister, 41-year-old Christine Vance, and her own 14-year-old son, Talon. In August of 2022, fueled by Rebecca's fierce, if misguided, conviction, the trio walked away from their lives. They trekked deep into the Gunnison National Forest, a vast and unforgiving wilderness in the high Rockies of Colorado. They carried with them a tent and what they believed was enough equipment to start a new life. They were not just camping. They were attempting to disappear forever. They were convinced that with enough willpower, they could tame the wilderness. The wilderness, however, had other plans. They set up a crude camp near the Gold Creek campground. Their initial days were likely filled with a sense of purpose, a belief that they were the smart ones, the ones who had seen the truth. But as summer turned to fall, their romantic vision began to collide with a brutal reality. The food they had brought, or hoped to find, grew scarce. The nights grew colder. They were not experienced survivalists. They were novices armed with internet theories. They lacked the proper gear for a high-altitude Colorado winter, with inadequate clothing and a flimsy tent that offered little protection against the elements. They had no emergency plan, no satellite beacon, no pre-arranged date to return if things went wrong. Their ideology had left no room for failure. The winter of 2022 to 2023 descended upon them with merciless force. Temperatures plummeted far below freezing. Snow buried the landscape, making hunting or foraging impossible. Their bodies, already weakened by malnutrition, began to succumb to the relentless cold. The psychological horror of their situation is difficult to fathom. The initial hope would have slowly curdled into a gnawing hunger, then a chilling apathy. Hypothermia would have set in, bringing confusion, hallucinations, and a paradoxical feeling of warmth that might have led them to shed clothing in their final, delirious moments. They likely fell asleep in their tent one last time, and simply never woke up. For nearly a year, the world knew nothing of their fate. Their family, from whom they had become estranged, could not reach them. It wasn't until July 9th, 2023, that a lone hiker exploring the remote area stumbled upon the tattered remains of their camp. He found a body, severely decomposed, and immediately alerted the authorities. Rescuers arrived to a scene of profound tragedy. Inside the collapsed tent, they found the other 2 bodies. The camp was a testament to their failed dream, an improvised shelter, a few scattered belongings, and virtually no food. The coroner's report was stark and heartbreaking. All three had died from a combination of malnutrition and hypothermia. Their deaths were not sudden. They were a slow, agonizing descent into starvation and exposure. One family member later told reporters, "She didn't like the way the world was going. She thought it would be better if her and her son and Christine were alone, away from everybody." Their story became a global cautionary tale, a horrifying example of how the romantic fantasy of off-grid living, when pursued without knowledge or respect for the power of nature, can lead to a slow and lonely death. Case 3. The Wonnangatta High Country. Killings. Some secrets are not meant to be kept, and some camping trips are more than just a getaway. For 74-year-old Russell Hill and 73-year-old Carol Clay, their trip to Australia's remote Wonnangatta Valley in March 2020 was the continuation of a decades-long secret. Russell, a retired logger and experienced bushman, was married. Carol, a respected former president of the Country Women's Association, was his secret lover. To hide their affair, Russell would sometimes tell people Carol was his niece. Their camping trips were clandestine escapes, moments stolen away from their public lives, deep in the Victorian high country, where no one would find them. On March 19, 2020, Russell picked up Carol, and they headed into the mountains in his trusty Toyota Land Cruiser. Russell was an expert in this terrain, a seasoned camper who knew the bush like the back of his hand, his HF radio his constant companion. They reached the picturesque Wonnangatta Valley and set up their camp near the dry river track, a perfect, isolated spot. But on that evening, another camper arrived in the area, a 55-year-old airline pilot named Greg Lynn. The presence of another person in their secluded haven may have been an unwelcome intrusion. Tensions reportedly arose, possibly over Lynn's use of a drone or his hunting with a rifle near their campsite. On the Satusor evening of March 20th, Russell Hill made his last ever HF radio call. The transmission was cut short, abruptly and mysteriously. After that, silence. When the couple failed to return home, their families raised the alarm. The search began. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The only trace found was their campsite, or what was left of it. It had been scorched by a fire, a deliberate and intense blaze that had consumed their tent, chairs, and belongings. Russell's Land Cruiser was found nearby, abandoned but not burned. Of Russell and Carol, there was no sign. They had vanished into the vast, unforgiving bush. For 20 months, their disappearance remained one of Australia's most baffling mysteries. An intensive search involving helicopters, horse-mounted police, and ground crews found nothing. It was as if the valley had swallowed them whole. The breakthrough came in November 2021. Police arrested Greg Lynn, the pilot who had been camping nearby. Following his arrest, investigators were led to a remote, rugged area near Grant Historic Area, some 50 kilometers from the original campsite. There, they found human remains. Forensic analysis confirmed the worst. They belonged to Russell Hill and Carol Clay. The story that emerged in court was a chilling and contested account of what happened that night. Lynn claimed there was a struggle over his shotgun after Hill threatened to share drone footage of him hunting. He alleged the gun accidentally discharged, hitting Carol in the head and killing her instantly. A second struggle, he claimed, ensued over a knife, during which Russell Hill was fatally stabbed. Lynn insisted it was a tragic series of accidents and self-defense. He admitted to burning the campsite and moving the bodies to cover up the incident, fearing he would be blamed for the deaths. The prosecution painted a far more sinister picture, arguing that Lynn deliberately murdered both campers and concocted an implausible story to escape justice. The jury was ultimately divided. In June 2024, they found Greg Lynn guilty of the murder of Carol Clay, but acquitted him of the murder of Russell Hill. The split verdict left the families with a sense of incomplete justice. A family member stated, "We will never know the full story of what happened in that valley." The secret love affair that had sought refuge in the wilderness had ended in a brutal, fiery tragedy, leaving behind a legacy of secrets, lies, and a murder mystery that may never be fully solved. Case 4. The Isle Royale murder. Isle Royale National Park is not a place for the casual camper. It is a remote, rugged island archipelago in the frigid waters of Lake Superior, accessible only by boat or seaplane. It is a destination for serious backpackers, paddlers, and solitude seekers, people who come to disconnect from the world in one of the least visited national parks in the United States. In early June of 2025, 2 adult campers, whose names have not been publicly released, arrived on the island with a backcountry permit, ready for just such an experience. They ventured deep into the island's interior, hiking the primitive trails to a secluded campground. Here, the only sounds are the lapping of the waves, the cry of a loon, and the wind in the pines. Help is miles away. Rangers are a long hike or a boat ride from any given point. This total isolation is the park's main attraction, but on this trip, it would become the silent witness to a tragedy. On the afternoon of June 8th, the National Park Service received 2 independent reports from other hikers who had stumbled upon a disturbing scene at a remote campsite. They reported seeing 2 people who appeared to be dead. The park's emergency protocol was activated immediately. 2 rangers were dispatched on foot. They hiked for hours, covering roughly 11 miles of difficult terrain, racing against the fading daylight. They arrived at the campground around sunset to find the hikers. Reports were horrifyingly accurate. Inside and around the tent lay the 2 campers, both deceased. The scene told a grim story that needed no words. While the National Park Service was initially tight-lipped, stating only that the cause of death is unknown, later media reports, citing law enforcement sources, filled in the blanks. The evidence pointed to a murder-suicide. It's believed that in that profoundly isolated place, an argument between the 2 campers escalated to an unthinkable extreme. One of them produced a firearm. 1 shot, and 1 life was ended. A second shot, and the perpetrator's life ended as well. A domestic dispute, a personal demon, a moment of rage. Whatever the cause, it had played out to its fatal conclusion, miles from anyone who could have intervened. There was no wider threat to the public, no killer on the loose. The horror was contained to that single, tragic campsite. The park remained open, but a dark cloud hung over the island. The incident was a stark and brutal reminder that the dangers of the wilderness are not always external. We carry our own darkness with us, and sometimes the very solitude we seek to escape our problems can become the perfect, soundproofed environment for them to consume us entirely. Case 5. The Rock Island Campground Familicide. To the outside world, Travis Decker was an active dad. In his early 30s, his social media was a curated gallery of a loving father enjoying the great outdoors with his 3 beautiful daughters, 9-year-old Python, 8-year-old Evelyn, and 5-year-old Olivia. He posted about camping, hiking, and his love for nature. In June of 2025, he planned another one of these idyllic father-daughter trips, a camping adventure at the popular Rock Island campground along the Wenatchee River. It was meant to be quality time, a chance to create more happy memories in the mountains. On June 2nd, Travis and his 3 girls headed to the campground. Along the way, they shared cheerful photos and updates with family. The images painted a picture of a perfect family outing. But beneath this carefully constructed facade, a dark reality was festering. Travis was struggling with severe mental health issues and marital problems. The stress had been escalating for months. For his daughters, this was just another fun trip with Dad. For Travis, it was a journey to the end of the line. Later that day, in the beautiful, serene setting of the campground, the unthinkable happened. The psychological turmoil within Travis Decker erupted into an act of horrific violence. While details of the exact moment are sparse and agonizing to contemplate, the outcome was a parent's worst nightmare. When the family failed to make contact, worried relatives alerted the police. Authorities located Travis's vehicle in the campground area. What they found nearby shattered the peace of the forest. The bodies of Peyton, Evelyn, and Olivia were discovered in the woods near their campsite. 3 had been shot and killed by their own father. The scene was a sickening contradiction. A place designed for family fun and campfires had become a crime scene for a triple child murder. The FBI was called in, and the campground was cordoned off. The investigation revealed the deep-seated issues that Travis had hidden behind his active dad persona. While there had been warning signs of his deteriorating mental state, no intervention had been effective enough to prevent the tragedy. No one had imagined he was capable of such an act. ABC News later published a detailed timeline tracing how a man who once posted about loving the outdoors with his daughters is now accused of killing all 3. Local authorities described it as one of the most devastating family tragedies the region had ever witnessed. The case is a horrifying reminder that the most dangerous monsters are not the ones lurking in the woods, but the ones that can hide within a troubled mind, even within a family. For 3 little girls, a camping trip with their dad, a man they trusted completely, became their final terrifying journey. Case 6. The Colorado Cliff Edge Tent. In the age of social media, the pressure to capture the perfect photo, the ultimate view, can be immense. We seek out the most dramatic landscapes, the most Instagrammable spots, sometimes pushing the boundaries of safety for that one breathtaking shot. In August of 2019, a family, later identified in online posts as being led by 38-year-old Mark Langford, went on an adventurous camping trip in the Colorado mountains. They weren't content with a standard campsite. They wanted the ultimate view. They pitched their tent literally on the edge of a precipice, a sheer drop of hundreds of feet, just inches from their sleeping bags. Their plan was to wake up to a spectacular sunrise, suspended between heaven and earth. They got their dramatic location, but they would not live to see the sunrise. On August 9th, the family was reported missing after they failed to return from their trip. A search was launched. Rescue teams scanned the vast, rugged backcountry, checking trailheads and known campsites. The discovery, when it came, was surreal and horrifying. Searchers spotted the family's tent, not on the cliff edge, but hanging, crumpled and torn, against the rock face far below. It was upside down, a mangled wreck of canvas and poles, and inside were the bodies of the family. Investigators pieced together what likely happened. In the dead of night, as the family slept, some force had sent their tent plummeting into the abyss. It could have been a strong gust of wind catching the tent like a sail. It could have been the loose, unstable ground of the cliff edge giving way. Or it could have been as simple as one of the occupants rolling over in their sleep, a small movement that, in such a precarious position, had catastrophic consequences. The tent's anchors would have ripped from the ground, and in an instant, their shelter became a death trap. The fall was brutal. The occupants would have been thrown against each other in a chaotic, weightless moment, followed by a series of violent impacts against the rock face. The coroner's report would likely speak of massive trauma, multiple fractures, severe internal injuries, and fatal head wounds. It was a short, agonizing, and utterly preventable end to their quest for the perfect view. The image of the wrecked tent hanging from the cliff became a viral cautionary tale, shared across outdoor and true crime forums. The headline was as chilling as it was descriptive. Family missing camping in Colorado. Tent found upside down on cliff edge, bodies inside. Mountain rescuers have since used the story as a stark example in safety talks, a grim illustration of why the pursuit of a dramatic photo should never override the fundamental rules of camping safety. The family had found their ultimate view, but the price was there: lives. They had gambled everything for a sunrise they would never see. The wilderness doesn't have a conscience, it doesn't play favorites. It is a beautiful, powerful, and indifferent force. The stories we've heard tonight are horrifying, not just because of how they ended, but because of how they began. With a simple, human desire for connection, for escape, for adventure. From a random act of violence on a lonely mountain, to a misguided quest for purity, to a secret love affair that ended in fire, to the silent explosion of domestic rage, to the fatal pursuit of a perfect picture. These tragedies remind us that the greatest dangers we face are not always from the wild itself, but from the darkness within human nature and the fatal flaws in our own judgment. They are a reminder to respect the power of nature, to be prepared, to tell people where you are going, and to remember that sometimes the most beautiful places can hold the deepest sorrows. When you next venture into the great outdoors, remember these stories. Let them be a guide. Be safe, be smart, and cherish every sunrise. Because as these final moments prove, nothing is ever guaranteed.